and that they used some cheap Chinese creatine that was steroid tainted, which is apparently very common. Apparently, there's a lot of creatines and different things you take. They have trace amounts of steroids that'll show up in a test because the same vats that they make that shit in, they make steroids in, they make everything in. They're making them in China at these really shitty bulk places, and you'll occasionally get tainted supplements.
Jon Jones was sworn in and went under oath, and when he got to California, he was still hanging his hat on the argument of tainted supplement. When he went to California, he brought his evidence forward, which consisted of 12 supplements he was taking. Okay. All of them were tested, laboratory tested, and all of them came back negative for a tainted supplement.
There have been 134 anti-doping violations since USADA was implemented in the UFC. Of these 134 sanctions, 42% were due to or claimed to be due to tainted supplements. This is by far the biggest reasoning that UFC athletes give when they fail the USADA test. Some of the sport's biggest stars have used the tainted supplement excuse to explain their failed tests. But should we take this at face value, or are UFC athletes finding loopholes to lower any sanctions that they may receive? Let's find out. Out of the 57 total sanctions due to tainted supplements, we're going to only focus on a few key cases, each of which tell a slightly different story and help us get to the bottom of what might be going on here. To start off, we're going to cover one of the most famous cases regarding tainted supplements, that of Johnny Bones Jones. Jones's first run-in with USADA came from his initial test in 2016, where he claimed he failed that test due to a tainted supplement. It turned out it was actually a male enhancement pill from a company called All American Peptide that contained two prohibited substances, clomiphene and letrozole. That company has since been shut down and indicted by the US Department of Justice due to selling $3 million worth of misbranded and unapproved drugs. The second time that Jones was involved in a case of this magnitude was just before UFC 200, where he tested positive for turinabol.
There's a few things that have nothing to do with performance that I've tried, and like I said, whatever it is, I can't even pronounce it. I've never even heard of it. So I'm just now learning about it myself, and so right now I'm just going through and thinking about every single thing that I've taken leading up to the fight, and we're going through a process of getting everything figured out and seeing exactly where this came from.
Again, he initially claimed that a tainted supplement was the cause of that failed test. However, through the arbitration process, he supplied 14 different supplements, none of which contained any prohibited substances. No source was actually identified in this case. However, there were a few conspiracy theories floating around.
Did I tell you the craziest rumor about it?
Right.
Talked about it on the podcast before. The craziest rumor was, everybody knows John likes to party. I'm not throwing him under the bus. I mean, he's even joked around. He said to DC, when DC was talking shit, he's like, I beat you after I did cocaine.
Yeah.
I mean, which was fucking hilarious. But the craziest rumor was that they cut creatine with cocaine. It's one of the things they cut cocaine with, and that they used some cheap Chinese creatine that was steroid tainted, which is apparently very common. Apparently, there's a lot of creatines and different things you take. They have trace amounts of steroids that'll show up in a test because the same vats that they make that shit in, they make steroids in, they make everything in. They're making them in China at these really shitty bulk places, and you'll occasionally get tainted supplements.
You can put as much weight into this theory as you want to. Although it may be a reach, there could be some logic behind it. Sugar Sean O'Malley also tested positive for Osterin, a selective androgen receptor modulator, or SARM, which is a common contaminant found in supplements.
No, back in I think October last year, they had me take 0 supplements. All the supplements I was taking, or I'm taking right now too, is the NSF, the thorn supplements. But they told me in October for 30 days, don't take any supplements and write down everything you're taking a food log. That, and I still tested for 20, 30 picograms, taking 0 supplements, writing down everything I was taking, sent it in, and then they're like, "Fuck, we're still lost." But yeah, I'm doing everything they're telling me to do, and only taken Thorne NSF certified supplement.
Unlike Jones's second case, the tainted supplement was found, and O'Malley certainly changed a few of his behaviours around supplementation to stop that from occurring again. One of the most infamous tainted supplement cases in the UFC was that of Yoel Romero. Romero tested positive for ibutamorin, a growth hormone promoting agent. He initially did not know where the substance came from, but later found out it was from a supplement from Gold Star Performance.
And believe me, I don't understand what happened. I'm very serious. I know because this supplement, I take it.
Right.
I take it. Why this supplement?
Have something forbidden in it. Yeah.
See, why?
Right.
Why not before?
Yoel sued Gold Star Performance and was awarded $27.5 million in damages, of which he probably received very little due to the small size of the company. Yoel's case does bring up a significant point. Gold Star Performance is a small independent company that I would classify as extremely high risk for contamination. Why would you risk using anything from this company when it's not a reputable brand? It's extremely negligent at the very least. There have been numerous cases of tainted supplements in the UFC. So what actually happens when one of these occurs? In line with the World Anti-Doping Code, there are a few different outcomes if an athlete tests positive due to a contaminated supplement. However, it's all based on the principle of strict liability. Strict liability is a principle that each athlete is solely responsible for any banned substance they use, attempt to use, or is found in their system, regardless of how it got there or whether there was any intention to cheat. There have been criticisms of strict liability and its relation to anti-doping, as there are various ways that a prohibited substance can be found in someone's sample. Some of these can be really difficult to control, such as tainted water supplies, emergency medical procedures, or contaminated supplements and foods. However, this principle still dictates the outcome of failed tests. At worst, a contaminated supplement leading to the presence of a banned substance in a sample can result in a ban from sport for up to 4 years. If an athlete provides clear evidence that a supplement led to the failed test, then this can be reduced by up to 2 years, but only if the banned substance is not clearly indicated on the supplement label. Another outcome would be if the athlete proved that the contaminated supplement was a batch-tested product. There are specific third-party programs like Informed Sport or NSF Certified for Sport that supplements can be enrolled into for testing to make sure that no banned substances are present. If an athlete fails a test due to a batch-tested supplement, they would receive no sanction, as they've gone through the correct process. The risk of an Informed Sport or NSF Certified for Sport batch-tested supplement being contaminated is extremely low, and it's fairly easy to use one of these as well rather than an untested alternative. So really it does beg the question whether this is just negligence on behalf of the athlete. This is one of the reasons why most contaminated supplement cases do result in a ban. So how does this contamination of supplements happen in the first place? Well, most of it occurs during the manufacturing process. Most manufacturers will produce multiple products and handle many different ingredients. In some cases, you may also have manufacturers making supplements and medications in the same facility. Depending on where these products are produced, blended and packaged, there can be risks with ingredients from one product ending up in another.
It's very common, and a lot of times what happens is the suppliers, when you, say if you're a supplement company and you have someone make some stuff for you and then you package it and sell it, the people that are putting it together for you, they're selling a bunch of other things too, and oftentimes things get into your supplement that aren't supposed to be there.
This is usually due to poor manufacturing processes, such as not cleaning down the equipment between different lines of product. For example, a medication could be being produced by a manufacturer. They finish that line, and the next line is a pre-workout supplement. If they haven't cleaned down the equipment efficiently between lines, there could be residue of that medication ending up in the pre-workout product, which ultimately leads to a supplement sitting on a shelf containing ingredients that are not included on the label. Although some ingredients and medications are not on WADA's prohibited list, many are, so there can be risks of failed anti-doping tests for this very reason. There are certain standards and certifications for facilities, such as Good Manufacturing Practices or GMP certified facilities, which evaluates the premises, equipment and hygiene and training of staff. So using a product from a GMP certified facility certainly reduces the risk of contamination, which a lot of supplement companies like to shout about. But these certifications are granted on a one-off basis and then are checked over infrequently in future to make sure these standards are being kept. So, although it does reduce the risk, it certainly doesn't mitigate it entirely, hence why there are still risks when using products from GMP-only certified facilities. So what does this evidence tell us about contaminated supplements? How common is the contamination of supplements, and does that match the frequency of failed tests we're seeing for them in the UFC? One of the most groundbreaking studies in this area was published back in 2004 in the International Journal of Sports Medicine. The researchers examined 634 supplements from 215 different supplement companies across 13 different countries, 90% of which were bought off the shelf in stores, and around 10% of which were bought off the internet. Out of these 634 supplements, they found that just under 15%, or 1 in 6, contain pro-hormones not declared on the label. So we're talking about prohibited substances like testosterone, DHEA, and nandrolone, significant performance-enhancing substances.
So I could go into GNC and take the guy
There's
aside.
a lot of stuff that if you go into GNC, you'll buy stuff that's on the shelves for a little while and then they pull it. And when companies sell stuff to them, sometimes they'll say there's one thing in it, but there's other things in it as well. That's a real common thing, especially if something works really well. Like a lot of times the stuff that works really well, people find out, yeah, it works really well because there's fucking steroids in it. Yeah, it might not just be GNC, just any vitamin store.
Okay.
Not necessarily GNC, but there's a bunch of them. Legal steroids at GNC, Vitamin Shop, and Walmart and more. Yeah, see, this is very, very common. When you go to these places and buy these things, there's a lot of stuff at a regular vitamin store that'll make you test positive by USADA. You'll test for banned substances from stuff you just buy in a store.
This contamination risk did vary by country too. For example, the Netherlands had the highest risk of contamination, with 1 in 4 supplements from the Netherlands containing pro-hormones. The US and the UK were both around 19%, so approximately 1 in 5 supplements. And at the other end of the spectrum, there was no contamination found from countries like Switzerland and Sweden. They also examined the origin of the supplements, so although these products were bought from different countries, the vast majority of these tainted supplements were manufactured in the US. A key point from this study was that they only examined presence of anabolic steroids. They didn't examine the presence of other prohibited substances like SARMs or stimulants. If they did, the tainted supplement findings could be a lot higher. A much more recent study published in 2022 in Biomed Research International summarized all the current scientific evidence on dietary supplements as a source of unintentional doping. They also didn't limit the results to pro-hormones. They included all substances prohibited under the WADA code. A total of 50 studies were included in this review. They found that out of 3,132 total supplements across these studies, 875 contained undeclared prohibited substances. So a conclusion drawn from this study could be that 28% of all supplements available contain undeclared prohibited substances. Another really interesting study in this area was done by Fredrik Lauritsen, published in 2022, which examined the prevalence of the tainted supplement excuse from sanctions by a national anti-doping agency. In this case, it was Anti-Doping Norway, the Norwegian equivalent of USADA. Lauritsen looked at all anti-doping rule violations over an 18-year period to see how many times a tainted supplement was claimed to be the cause. He found that 26% of all anti-doping rule violations were due or claimed to be due to tainted supplements. There are differences in some of these data sets, notably where these supplements were purchased, but just compare these results to that of which we're seeing in the UFC. Over an 18-year period, 26% of failed tests were due to contaminated supplements across an entire country. In the UFC, over a 7-year period, 42% of failed tests are claimed to be due to tainted supplements. You may well expect USADA to have higher prevalence of contamination based on the evidence we've already seen about the origin of contaminated supplements, but that might not be the case. Another study published a few years earlier found that only 7.7% of total failed tests were associated with dietary supplements. Although it's a different time period and a different athlete population, it is the same anti-doping agency employed by the UFC, and this almost contradicts the evidence we're seeing published by them. So are UFC athletes more likely to use contaminated supplements, Or is the excuse more prevalent than the reality? There have been cases where USADA have ruled against UFC fighters in tainted supplement cases, notably that of Kai Lewis Parry. After Parry failed for a combination of prohibited substances, including Winstrol and Turinabol, he claimed the contaminated supplement defense. USADA prompted Parry to get his supplements tested at a number of different WADA-accredited facilities to see if the contamination was present. There are a few twists and turns to this story, and I'm not going to be able to go into all the different ones in this one video. Essentially, what ended up taking place was that Parry eventually submitted a single supplement to a laboratory for testing, which came back as negative for prohibited substances. Nearly a year later, he then submitted another supplement for testing, which his partner surprisingly found in the back of a cupboard whilst cleaning. The lab found this supplement contained a prohibited substance, but the level present in this supplement was extremely high and not consistent with contamination levels. In fact, the levels of prohibited substances that high are easily obtained through manual manipulation, for example, crushing a 50mg Winstrol tablet and mixing it into this supplement. For this, Parry was not only sanctioned with presence, but also tampering, and this led to a 4-year ban from the sport. Also, due to this anti-doping case, Parry never ended up competing in the UFC, but it does provide evidence that fighters can falsely claim the tainted supplement defense to mask their doping practices. Based on the research, we know that contaminated supplements are common, especially in the US. But in my opinion, there is a disparity between tainted supplement cases in other sports compared to the UFC. The prevalence of these cases in the UFC is extremely high, so that could suggest that UFC athletes are more prone to taking supplements, or it's a convenient excuse in the case of anti-doping rule violations, which may help to reduce their sanction. If this is the case and there's nothing nefarious going on here, what's the fix? Well, the only way to eliminate risk completely from taking a contaminated supplement is to not use any supplementation whatsoever, but that can be difficult for professional athletes. Although a professional athlete can thrive without using supplements, it may not be optimal or practical to do so given the fueling and recovery demands of professional sport. A much easier and much more achievable way of mitigating risk is to just use batch-tested supplements. Once you understand the risks and are shown how to choose a batch-tested supplement, it's very easy to do so. But there's a very critical part of that statement. Once you understand. It is absolutely crucial that athletes are educated in this area, and there is a responsibility on the UFC to educate their athletes if they are subject to anti-doping testing. It's not simply down to education alone. You're also trying to influence the behaviors and habits of the athletes. So the UFC should be monitoring their athletes' behaviors when it comes to supplementation and incentivize the use of batch-tested products, which they currently do by partnering with one of the biggest global brands, Thorne. Thorne enroll their products in NSF Certified for Sport, which is a gold standard program. Although I did see this statement in their partnership renewal press release, which I did find quite interesting. Since the UFC began offering Thorne's NSF Certified for Sport supplements to their athletes in 2019, there has not been a single incident of a failed drug test from contaminants in supplements or challenges with weight management. Incorrect. There's been 28 of them. Despite this, I would be interested to know how far the incentivization goes for the UFC to their athletes. Are Thorne just a commercial partner, or are they offering anything to the athletes themselves? If athletes were to get things such as free products and have a year-round supply of those, that would certainly be a really positive step. Plus, I'd like to know the details about what their education program looks like and how they establish whether it's effective or not. A simple online module they can click through in less than 5 minutes is not sufficient by any means. So I'd like to see the details of that, but hopefully they've got something a bit more substantial. So we understand the risk of supplement contamination is fairly high, and that the UFC have some measures in place to reduce this risk. But we are still seeing a significantly high number of failed tests due to contaminated supplements. So who is to blame? As I've said before, a large proportion of this responsibility sits with the UFC themselves. If they are implementing this level of testing, they should be educating their athletes sufficiently and providing them with the tools they need to make safe choices. There is a huge responsibility on the fighters as well. Once you know what to do, it's very easy to choose a batch-tested supplement and supplement safely. But there is another aspect to this as well. Although the presence of a prohibited tainted supplement ultimately falls on the head of the fighter, from an ethical perspective, it's not just their responsibility. Athlete support personnel like coaches and managers also need to know the risks of supplementation, especially when there can be financial incentives to using or endorsing certain supplement brands. One of the most prominent income streams for professional athletes is their endorsements and sponsors, of which sports nutrition or supplement companies commonly feature. Athlete endorsements is one of the biggest marketing strategies for supplement companies. Therefore, anyone dealing with these commercial relationships, either directly, if the athlete themselves, or on behalf of the athlete, as would be the case for a manager, needs to be educated on the risks of supplementation. If a manager is approached by a supplement company that wants to pay top dollar for their UFC athlete to endorse a product, they will obviously want to go down that route. It also just so happens that the two biggest cases that I've reviewed in this video both have the same management team in the UFC. First Round Management, which is run by the Cower brothers. In fact, First Round Management have had 10 separate anti-doping sanctions with 9 different fighters since USADA was implemented, 6 of which are tainted supplement cases.
So can I ask you what that process is like? I mean, a professional athlete like yourself at the highest level, when a supplement is brought to them, a new substance, a new whatever, then somebody says, hey, this is good for you, you should take this. What do you do to vet that? I mean, who recommends, yes, John, this is okay? What guards are in place to make sure that you don't put yourself in a situation like this, whether willingly or unknowingly?
Right. You know, on my management team, you know, I was very aware that everything needs to be documented and leading up to the fight, and you know, I didn't really stress that whole thing, you know, and I think you know, I just know in my heart that I would never take anything that enhanced me in any way.
In my opinion, First Round Management aren't learning from their experiences, but they're also not providing adequate support to the athletes that they represent. There's certainly a lack of professionalism shown here by the Cower brothers, and it's negligent to say the least. Regardless of this side note, this financial aspect I mentioned previously can also bring us full circle back to the UFC. If a UFC fighter gets paid adequately, they may not have to seek additional income streams or take any money that they can get their hands on. It's a much bigger issue in the sport that does have these knock-on effects that need to be considered. The unfortunate situation is that many UFC fighters will not be able to make money from supplement partnerships, but simply try to cut their costs by getting anything that they can for free, which can open the door to endorsing and using supplements that may not be from reputable sources. So let's go back to the UFC's tainted supplement cases. Out of those fighters who have failed tests due to contaminated supplements, 23 have supplement sponsors or partnerships. For example, Jon Jones partners with GAT, who do not enroll their product in third-party batch testing for prohibited substances. Out of those 23 athletes who have supplement partnerships, only one fighter partners with a batch-tested reputable company, which is Sugar Sean O'Malley with Thorne, the UFC's partner brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I literally just work with Thorne now. I take Thorne NSF supplements, and if I do have anything with protein in it, it has to say NSF. You can go get like yogurt, Greek yogurt dressing that has whey protein in it. That's protein, and if it's not NSF certified, that protein could have ostarine in it. So I literally look at the back of all the ingredients of everything I buy and make sure it doesn't have any kind of pea protein or any kind of protein. And if it does, it has to say NSF certified, and if not, I don't eat it. So yeah, it definitely makes me, it changes how I look at things.
I'd personally say that Sean is an excellent example to other fighters with his approach to supplementation. It's not worth the risk, especially when you consider you could lose 4 years of your career based on a contaminated supplement. So will this continue to happen? Well, the global supplement industry is currently worth approximately $155 billion and is expected to grow to more than $220 billion by 2027. It's a huge industry which is showing no signs of slowing down. With more supplements available, the risk of contamination is also likely to rise. If the UFC aren't educating their athletes and those that work with their athletes sufficiently, it's likely that this will remain an issue for the foreseeable future. Undoubtedly, there will be more cases of tainted supplements to come, either genuine or fraudulent. When the next tainted supplement case arrives, I'd certainly treat it with a healthy amount of skepticism, whilst also appreciating that there is a very genuine and real issue within the industry. I hope this video has detailed one of the most persistent storylines we see in the UFC. If you found this video useful or interesting, I'd obviously really appreciate your subscription. Or if you've got any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments section down below and I'll get back to as many of them as I can. I'll see you in the next one.